On the 22nd of December in 1861, a 16-year-old boy visits the National Theatre in Munich to watch a performance of Richard Wagner's Tannhäuser. As a minor, however, he is accompanied there by an adult. The adult describes the teenager's reaction to the opera as follows. At the point where Tannhäuser re-enters the mountain of Venus, his body went into formal convulsions. It was so severe that I feared an epileptic seizure. The boy whose ecstatic enthusiasm is described here is none other than the later Swan King, Ludwig II of Bavaria. And it seems to have been this performance that made the boy dream that one day he would build his own Mountain of Venus or Venus Grotto, modelled on Richard Wagner's Tannhäuser. But until then it was to take another 16 years, and that is until 1877. A scene from Luchino Visconti's film Ludwig, starring Helmut Berger, provides a well-reconstructed insight into the atmosphere and use of the grotto by Ludwig, based on the source reports and the original location. The scene shows King Ludwig's first meeting with his favorite actor Joseph Kainz, whom he invited to his grotto for a private audience and maybe a performance. Apart from the numerous studies on the relationship between Richard Wagner's opera and King Ludwig's buildings, the Venus Grotto has been the subject of mainly technical and architectural investigations in recent years. However, I would like to make an attempt to look at the Venus Grotto and its underlying theme through ancient glasses and thus place it in a broader historical and cultural context. One lens will be Greek mythology and the motif of the cave or grotto that appears in it. The other lens will be an ancient precursor of artificial grotto architecture, and that is the Tiberian grotto in Sperlonga. The underlying theme of the Venus Grotto is the legend of Tannhäuser in the version of Richard Wagner. However, the legend, which is actually set in German surroundings, reveals itself on closer inspection to be a mix of originally Greek myths and mythical elements. Tannhäuser is a brilliant minnesinger, who can even enchant the goddess Venus with his music and singing, and who is therefore initiated by her into the secrets of love and love-making in her grotto, where he enjoys endless pleasures of love and this is precisely the content of the painting in Ludwig's Venus Grotto. The goddess is so enchanted by Tannhäuser that she even promises him immortality and makes him forget his mortal beloved, Elisabeth. So, Tannhäuser can be seen as a Germanized mix of Orpheus and Odysseus, and the goddess Venus as a variant of Calypso or Circe. But just as the love story of Orpheus and Eurydice does not have a happy ending on earth, neither does the love story of Tannhäuser and Elisabeth. Tannhäuser longs for the ephemeral world in the monotony of eternal pleasures. Venus expels and curses Tannhäuser from her grotto. Once back in the ephemeral world, he meets his old Minnesinger colleague Wolfram, who reminds him of his beloved Elisabeth, the Landgrave's niece. The Landgrave invites the Minnesingers to his castle and encourages them to take part in a singing contest. The topic of the singing contest? Love. So, not only Greek mythology, but also Greek philosophy can be found in the legend of Tannhäuser. For the praise of love is also the topic of Plato's Symposium. And just as Plato's dialogue distinguishes between ordinary, physical, and heavenly, philosophical love, the legend of Tannhäuser is also fundamentally about the contrast between profane and holy love. But unlike Plato's Symposium, the contest in Tannhäuser ends in a total fiasco. Tannhäuser, who is well initiated by Venus into the secrets of profane love, has only contempt for the state songs of the other Minnesingers, who have no idea of the real happiness of physical love. But with these remarks, he irrevocably breaks the heart of his beloved Elisabeth, who is present at the contest. Elisabeth asks God for death, dies, and Tannhäuser drops dead at Elisabeth's bier. But the green branch on Tannhäuser's walking stick seems to indicate his redemption and the victory of holy love. So much for the content of the Tannhäuser legend and the corresponding equivalents in Greek mythology. But what functions did Ludwig's Venus Grotto have? And what functions do caves and grottos have in ancient mythology in general? If one tries to summarize the function or the basic characteristic of a cave or grotto in ancient mythology in general, and as abstractly as possible, one can understand it as a spatialized unit of differences with an osmotic or permeable character. The fundamental leading differences here are, in topographical terms, inside, outside, and in functional terms, safety, danger. Here, these leading differences can be topically modified by substituting terms and or qualitatively different contexts. For example, as the differences unification, separation, culture, wilderness, truth, illusion, non-human, human, life-death, eternity, temporality, and so on. The two sides of the respective difference can also be reversed with regard to the opposition inside-outside, depending on whether one directs the point of view from inside to outside or vice versa, or whether one goes into, out, or even past the cave. Thus, for example, according to Hesiod, the cave is as much a safe place for humans of the more unpleasant Silver Age as it is for the non-human Cyclops Polyphemus. And in the same way, while for Plato the cave is a space of illusion and falsehood, for Virgil it is a space of prophecy and the revelation of truth. With regard to Ludwig's Venus Grotto, we can conclude from a contemporary eyewitness account that Ludwig used his grotto in accordance with its function in Tannhäuser not only, but also as a darkroom for his homosexuality. However, the cave as a space of sexuality and debauchery has its model not only in Tannhäuser, but also in ancient mythology. In general, the caves of the nymphs are connoted as a space of sexual intercourse, and so, apart from the Calypso episode in the Odyssey, the cave of the nymph Maia as the place of Hermes' procreation can also be mentioned as an example. But also the cave into which Aeneas and Dido take refuge on their excursion and where they celebrate their bridal night, in Latin Hymenaios, is an example of this very function. This function is additionally explained by the fact that the cave, as the place of education and residence of Dionysus, also functions as a space of debauchery and ecstasy. And where Dionysus is, there's also poetry and music. And so the cave is also designated as a special refuge for these domains. Likewise, Ludwig also used the Venus Grotto as a place for music and the recitation of poetry, as we know from historical sources. The Venus Grotto was also conceived by Ludwig as a private stage and has been designed by him on the basis of real stage sets. Finally, probably the most important function of the Venus Grotto is described by the same royal chef who has already referred to the dark room function and was one of the few people who saw the grotto from inside during the king's lifetime. He says, "After having cleared the table, I could invisibly watch the king being rowed across the lake in a golden shell. It looked spooky. I still remember how an eerie, oppressive feeling came over me. The thought that the king could be sick didn't occur to me." Ultimately, the Venus Grotto was above all a place of illusion and distracting reveries, for which Plato naturally provided the most vivid image in Antiquity with his allegory of the cave. But Ovid's depictions of the cave of Somnus and the dreams lying around him in the 11th book of his Metamorphoses also provide an ancient variant of this function. But as the previous quotation from the royal chef Theodor Hirneis shows, the Venus Grotto was also a place where Ludwig took his meals. In mythology, the Grotto of Calypso is also a prominent precursor for this grotto function. But with regard to the grotto as a place of eating and drinking, there's also a non-mythical precursor from antiquity. And that is the Tiberian Grotto in Sperlonga, which was primarily a space of the Roman banquet, the so-called cena. Looking at the reconstruction of the sculptural decoration of the grotto, one is immediately struck by the prominence of the myth of Odysseus. Just as King Ludwig seems to have identified with Tannhäuser as a Germanized version of Odysseus, an identification of Tiberius with Odysseus is also quite plausible, also against the backdrop of the Suetonian biography. Suetonius, for example, quotes a letter written by Augustus, in which he describes Tiberius with the help of a quotation from Homer. Within the Iliad, the verses, quoted by Augustus, reflect Diomedes' opinion about Odysseus. In addition, the Suetonian account about Tiberius' treatment of his daughter-in-law Agrippina recalls Odysseus' punishment of Polyphemus, a scene that was not only presumed but actually depicted in the grotto. But let's compare Emperor Tiberius and King Ludwig II directly with each other. In what ways are they alike, and in what ways are they not? Above all, they resemble each other in their reclusiveness and fear of publicity. However, what sets them in absolute contrast to each other is, on the one hand, the military excellence and cruelty of character attributed to Tiberius, and, on the other hand, the peaceable, gentle, and dreamy disposition of Ludwig, who hated any form of violence and war. If one also realizes that King Ludwig's private library not only contained an edition of the Suetonian biographies, but that the king also provably studied them, one cannot help but suspect that Ludwig drew lessons from Suetonius. Despite everything, he seems likely to have felt sympathy for his Roman ancestor in certain respects. Here, not least, the love of grottos as favorite places of retreat seems to have been a point of sympathy for Ludwig. His government goals of becoming a gentle Tiberius with an Neronian sense of art has not been handed down historically, but this very description for the so-called Swan King seems to me to provide a good and above all beneficial alternative to the kitschy image that unfortunately still dominates Bavarian guidebooks up to the present day. Thank you very much for your attention.